Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to the Species Canine podcast. I'm Jared, your host. Today's show is actually a viewer request. Wayne asked me to discuss the breed differences between the Cane Corso and the Boerboel. One is an Italian dog, one's a South African dog. And here, let's get into it. All right, so these two breeds couldn't be any more different in the aspects of what they were originally bred to do. So, go water in my shirt. The Cane Corso originally, being an Italian breed, was bred primarily for personal protection and came from the descendants of the Roman dog of war, and they were used for fighting and for battles and so forth. Now, as countries started to calm down and the evolution of armament and technology advanced, the use of dogs in that capacity for war kind of went away. And just in general, that region of the world, war was not taking place as much. And so those dogs essentially lost a job. The Cane Corso, after losing its job as a war fighter, needed to find a new purpose in the world, and farmers and hunters started using it for those purposes, for farming and for hunting and livestock and droving and farmstead protection and guarding, and becoming much more of a flock guardian / estate protection type dog. And even then, that kind of wore out its welcome to a point that the dog was simply just not being bred anymore, not being used. And because of economic and political reasons within the Italian peninsula and Sicily, the breed almost became extinct. And it was only because of a few very dedicated Cane Corso owners that really loved the breed that set out to preserve it, and eventually founded the Society of Cane Corso Lovers. Essentially, that's what it was actually called. When translated to English, I'm not going to try to pronounce it in Italian. That was in 1970. And they went out into the hill countries and the farms and the very rural areas of Italy to find these dogs still and to preserve them and start breeding and developing them. And it wasn't until 1988 when the dog was actually introduced to the Americas. And then in 2010, the breed was actually recognized by the 𝐾C. So 𝐾C didn't recognize this breed until 21st century. So it has a long history. It's a very terminal history, and has kind of lost their way as far as I'm concerned. If you look at some of the pictures here I've been posting of them, if you look at some of the older pictures, the dog simply does not look the same as it did many, many years ago. Primarily, if you look at some of the older pictures from the 70s and things like that, they got a bigger head, they're droopier, getting more of the wrinkles. And now if you even look at the 𝐾C, I'm posting pictures of the 𝐾C dogs here, because that is now the standard for that breed. That's what it looks like. That's what 𝐾C does. It sets the standard for the look of the breed. And if you know the show, you know how I feel about the 𝐾C, but that's what we got to deal with. And so the look of the dog has changed. And from the few that I've worked with here locally, they're not warfighter, aggressive, protection dogs. There's gigantic babies that never met a stranger in their life. And unfortunately, that's the world we're coming to with some of these breeds, because the 𝐾C, and people just not breeding for these dogs to do anymore. There's comments in some of the videos about how I hate Cane Corsos. I have no hate for any animal whatsoever, especially a dog breed. What I do hate is what the 𝐾C is rewarding and what people are breeding for. And people are getting these dogs and not breeding the appropriate traits and essentially ruining the breed. If you go back and you watch my video about the evolution of herding breeds and the protection video of 2.0, I discussed this with Lego, my German Shepherd, and Taliana, my Beauceron, how they're both herding breeds and they're completely the opposite dogs now, because they're Lego's German Shepherd. His breed has been so bastardized and used for sport work and show lines, and not so much the herding lines. They don't herd no more. They don't use German Shepherds for that. Where you can see Taliana still has it very much genetically in her to want to herd and chase and do those things. And that's why I actually went with a Beauceron, because the breed isn't as bastardized. But I digress. So as far as overall size differences in these two dogs, and we'll talk about the Boerboel here in a second, and its little history and lineage. The Cane Corso, and you're going to, now going off of breed standards, AKC standards for this dog, you're going to be typically somewhere between about 23.5 inches to about 27.5 inches high. The weight is going to be about 100 pounds, not much bigger, not much heavier than that. Short coats, the Cane Corso, typically docked tails and docked ears, but a big dog, nevertheless, but nowhere near a Boerboel. Okay. This made very, very clear on the size difference here. Okay. So depending on your needs and what you want, what you're looking for, Cane Corso, it's a great dog. I've worked with a few of them. Just make sure you're getting it from a really good breeder, and you know what you're getting into and what they're breeding for. Now, Boerboels, their history, which is kind of really interesting history, as far as the Dutch settlers into South Africa, were bringing Mastiff and Molosser breeds into the area, and bulldogs. And essentially, the Boerboel came to be out of Darwinism, essentially. There was no one really selectively breeding for this. These dogs were just kind of breeding, and there's breeding big dogs for protection and for hunting, and started coming out with the Boerboel. And these dogs were originally bred for farm protection and for hunting. These are a massive breed. These dogs are going to be between the same height, 22, 23 inches, 27 inches. But we're talking about a dog that's 150 to 200 pounds. That is a big, big dog. So when you're looking at this and you're thinking about Boerboels, these dogs were originally intended and used for protection from apex predators. So the word boer is actually a Dutch word for farm. The Dutch and Germans who were settling in South Africa in the mid 1600s were bringing these big mastiff type dogs, and they were kind of interbreeding, and eventually came up with the Boerboel dog. These dogs, they're hunting lions and protecting against lions, and they were also being used for protection against baboons. These are apex predators that these things were fighting against. So they had to have a big, ferocious dog that, one, was gentle enough to be around the family and smart enough to understand the difference between a friend and foe and make that decision on their own without so much of the handler's guidance, as the Cane Corso was looking for more of that feedback from the handler. Boerboels should be a very fearless dog, very suspicious of strangers, and specialize in protection of home and, estate protection. So when we talk about that from an ethology standpoint, these dogs should have really high territorial aggression and not be welcoming in strangers or anything into their territory without being challenged, and then understanding from an owner standpoint what I need to deal with it or not, and understand the difference between a friend and foe. There are Boerboels out there that are on the opposite end of the spectrum of that, just like any dog, any breed. Okay. So if you're looking to go down that route, you need to understand what you're getting, where you're getting it from, what the traits of this dog is. They are used in competitive pulling, weight pulling. I've seen that along like pit bulls and other bully breeds, things like that. Is there a big dog with a low center of gravity, so it allows them to pull easier? Boerboels were actually admitted 5 years after the Cane Corso AKC working group, and that was in 2015. So you have a dog, the Cane Corso, that's lineage comes from that warfighter and protection that was used, started transitioning into hunting, and then kind of just transitioned out of that into kind of the hodgepodge of what we see today. Or the Boerboel, which I've never actually worked with one or met one, or a very rare breed. I knew a guy in California that specialized in Boerboel rescues. I think he did like 2 or 3 rescues a year, because that's how very rare these dogs were. His day job was actually animal transport, and he transported all kinds of any animal you needed transported across the country. He can arrange it and handle it. So they're very rare. Never have seen one in person, and have not had the opportunity to work with one yet. I'd like to. He could be a fun dog to work with. But again, this is if you're looking to get a big breed, 200-pound dog is a lot of dog. I've had 180-pound English Mastiffs, and that's a lot of dog to be roaming around your house. They're twice as expensive. Everything's more expensive. Vet visits, medications, heartworm more expensive. Vaccinations are more expensive. Feeds more expensive. Everything just doubles almost in cost because of their size. Not to mention cleaning up after them. You're using a snow shovel to pick their poop up. It's insane having that big of a dog, but they're cool. I love having big dogs around like that. A lot of fun. But again, it really depends on what you're looking for in breeds. I'm not sure what Wayne was looking for as far as a comparison. It really is like comparing apples and oranges, to these dogs. They are completely opposite ends of the spectrum. I think for the Boerboel, you're going to probably find more of a true genetics. You're probably going to find more of those dogs that are going to have that fearlessness, have a lot of aggression, for territorial aggression, and have more of the opportunity not to back down from fights and not so much skittishness, simply because it's an unknown breed. I say that not everybody has them. They don't have the it dog right now like Cane Corsos are. We're not seeing that. So you're not having a whole bunch of breeders out there just breeding to try to make a buck and breeding out any of the traits that really makes the Boerboel. If you wanted a really cool, like a state protection dog, you wanted to do that type of work, this would be the dog. This is probably where I would start with, simply because you're going to be much more likely to find a dog that's going to have those genetics that hasn't been bred out of them. Unlike if you said, hey, I want to do protection work, and I want to find a German Shepherd, you're going to put a little bit of work into finding one or spend a lot of money on importing one in order to make sure you're getting what you want and not getting a whole bunch of barrier frustration and sport line stuff in those dogs. So it really depends on what you want, but they're both great breeds. I love dogs in general. Little dogs, big dogs, it doesn't matter. But the Boerboel, it's a cool dog. I like the fact that because of the way they came around, almost through like the Darwinism, almost that their own selective breeding and not so human-centric breeding, I think you get a big, healthier dog. Genetic or health issues that you're going to see with some of the other mainstream dogs, because they're just not breeding them like that. You're not having any risk of inbreeding or breeding in bad genetics. So yeah, hopefully this kind of gives you a little insight between the two of them. Wayne, I greatly appreciate your support and question. Hopefully this answers your question on that. The pictures, I was trying to find some pictures that had dates to them. It was really difficult just to find older photos, but some of the stuff, it's older, but not that old on here. Definitely none of the dates. Some of them, you can see some of the stuff in the background. You can tell it's probably, 40s or 50s time frame. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. If you have a Boerboel, drop me a comment. I want to know about it. Talk to me about it. Tell me about that dog. Would you do it again? Would you get another one? Was it your first one? Drop me a comment. I want to hear about that, because I think it'd be really, really cool to have a conversation with somebody that actually has a Boerboel. And if you got any videos or anything, you want to drop a link of them, would love to see it. The only other dog I think would compare most closely to the Boerboel would be the Brazilian Fila. The temperament and kind of what they were bred for are very, very similar as far as that state protection and, having that really, high drive of not wanting to back down from a fight, but not going out and looking for one, right? And so seeing that reminds me of my Fila, Cleo, that I fostered for a few years before we found the perfect home for. And that temperament kind of reminds me of the Fila. So those two dogs, the Boerboel and the Fila, were probably more closely similar in statute than the Cane Corso and then the Boerboel. So again, drop me a comment below. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember to train smart.